What if loneliness isn't about being alone, but about feeling unseen? Welcome to another episode of the Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Gabriel Chavarria Sod, and I am joined by my dad.
I am your father.
There we go. And today's going to be a slightly different episode because I am in Ireland, like usual. But my dad is not in Malaga. Where are you, dude? I can see you have a different background this time than usual.
Yeah, you do. You can see it. Yes, I'm not in Malaga as usual. I am not in the dingy little room. I am glorious Bologna, Spain. It's a little town of 20 minutes away from Tarifa.
Mm-hmm.
The city of wind here. It's full of beautiful wildlife, beautiful beaches, beautiful sea life, whales, orcas, dolphins, kite surfers. Yeah, we're here celebrating Mummy's birthday for the weekend. So it's a glorious time. So yes,
I'm happy. And I am in Ireland studying for my final exams because I start on Monday. So, by the time this gets out, last Monday, this comes out. Sorry, but
you're in lonely Ireland.
Exactly. As you guys could tell by the intro, today's episode is about loneliness. We mentioned it briefly, I think, at the very beginning of when we started our podcast in the moving out. I think it's in the moving out or the moving abroad episode. But today we are going to be talking about it, only going to be talking about loneliness, and we will be talking about our experiences with loneliness, how we kind of got past that, and how it's different nowadays compared to when my dad was my age, how men can, seeing as we are men, so we don't know how women could talk about it back then, but how men can talk about it now versus back then. So yeah, okay, let's get straight into it. You want to say anything before we start, my dude?
Nothing at all. Just I have my little anti-wind little thing here in the microphone because it is quite windy here, so apologies for any background noise. Apart from that, let's go.
You don't just have a big, well, I guess a small mouse on your on your shirt.
No. No, it's not a little tiny mouse crawling up my neck.
Perfect. Bueno. What do you remember any time when you were younger, or maybe not younger, but kind of any time in your life when you particularly felt lonely? I don't know if you knew back then that you felt lonely or not, but I guess if you think back now, what was it like, and kind of why did you feel like that?
Yes, I can. I mean, I'm not a very sociable person, so I'm actually quite the loner myself.
Yeah.
And that has caused me to feel lonely throughout a lot of my life, throughout various points in my life. Not a lot, so to speak, but there's various points in my life where I did feel lonely. The very first one that comes to mind was my post secondary school, post graduation years. First couple of years, I felt very lonely because I stayed. We've also mentioned this in other podcasts. I stayed here in Spain when everybody left, including my girlfriend at the time, and I was alone. I was very much alone, and I did feel lonely. It wasn't I have to point out that most of the times I felt lonely in my life, it hasn't always been accompanied by bad feelings, right? Because I'm pretty good at being alone. I know that's a weird way of putting it. So these couple of years, of course, there were times where I felt very, very literally, properly, slightly depressed and alone when seeing that everybody else was leading the lives they wanted and I wasn't. But generally speaking, I was able to overcome that pretty easily. Yeah, and that's been a constant throughout my life. There was also a time after I came back from the UK when I was around 25, 26, between 25 and 28, so to speak. There were times where I felt quite lonely there, even though surprisingly I was always surrounded by people.
Yeah.
But they weren't the people I wanted to hang out with. They weren't people that were super meaningful in my life. And there were people that I got along with, but they didn't quite understand me. I also have I consider I have a very, very different way of thinking from most of my peers, and it's hard to understand me when you're around me. And when that misunderstanding hits, I actually feel lonely. And that period of time between 25 to 28, those 3 years, were like that a little bit. I was surrounded by people that didn't understand me, and I felt quite lonely, even though I was always surrounded by people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said in my hook, I feel like a lot of the times, well, obviously not a lot of the times, but sometimes the feeling of loneliness isn't necessarily because you are physically alone and you're not really interacting with many people, but you just don't feel either as seen as you did before, or you don't feel seen at all, and you can't really relate to the people that you're kind of hanging out with, which I guess was, like you said, was your problem back then.
Exactly.
So how did you get past this point of feeling unseen or feeling lonely? Do you remember how you did it, or was it just a gradual thing where bit by bit you felt more seen?
No, I remember exactly. There was the first point was the fact that I don't like feeling bad.
Mm-hmm.
I really dislike feeling bad. I in any kind of way. I don't like feeling sad. I don't like being hurt. I don't like being depressed. And I've always taken that as a motivation to get out of any kind of difficult situation I've been in.
Yeah.
And in this case, I could feel when I was feeling lonely, it's really easy to wallow in those feelings and to let those feelings overcome you.
Yeah.
And very early on, I understood that I couldn't do that, because otherwise I would be feeling depressed all the time. That was the first bit. Second, I've always been a very, very creative guy, and I've always considered myself within the artist spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Whether I'm a good artist or not is another podcast altogether. But because of that, I've always been very, very in touch with my own feelings and very in touch with my own mind. And I've always been very introspective and very self-reflective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really helped me get out of any kind of depression or any kind of any bad feelings of loneliness that I've ever had. So when every time I've felt them creeping up, I've sat down, I've looked at myself, I've reflected on how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling like that. And I've always found a way to get out of it, normally through action. And if I haven't had anybody around, that action has normally been some sort of art. Mm-hmm. Either playing guitar or trying to paint or trying to write, or trying to express my feelings and release them somehow.
Yeah.
And if I have to give anybody any advice, it's that. Of course, not everybody is artistically minded, but I think everybody has the power of self-reflection. I think everybody has the power to look inside themselves and ask themselves why they're feeling the things they're feeling. And that always brings up the answer, the conversation with yourself. How can I get out of here? Mm-hmm. It sounds really easy when I say it, but I realize that it's not. It's not. And I know that's why there's a lot of people that can't get out of it, because it's being self-reflective is one of the hardest things in the world, because we have a lot of dirt inside us, and it's really hard to come to terms with that dirt and recognize it. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like the saying says, easier said than done. No,
it is.
But ultimately, if you're feeling bad, because ultimately having the feeling of loneliness is it's a bad feeling. I guess you kind of have to get dirty and kind of
with
like
yourself.
Face getting well, that sounds a bit bad, but getting dirty with yourself. But yeah, you kind of do have to face your fears, like the other saying says. But anyways, and do you think if back then, kind of being able to talk about mental health and kind of the feeling of loneliness, do you think that would have helped back then? Because obviously when you were 25, 28, that must have been the early 2000s, no? Yeah, around late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like back then it wasn't taboo, but it wasn't nearly as I don't want to say popular, but as popular or as common to do nowadays, is it?
Yeah.
So do you think that would have helped you, or do you think it would have been you would have kind of gotten to the same conclusion by yourself?
That's a great question. I have no idea. To be honest, it's like you say, it wasn't even something that we ever contemplated. Things like going to a psychologist or psychiatrist wasn't exactly considered a day-to-day thing. It was a pretty extreme thing to do. So I never even contemplated. I don't think any of my friends ever did. However, I have to say that having been alone I've always had somebody to talk to, and that's always been crucial.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the day, I've always had my good friends that I've always had Fred, I've always had Nick, I've always had my brother Chendo to talk to, and later on in life, when my sisters were older, I always had them to talk to, or at least Teresa, and I think that's also incredibly important. You can be as self-reflective as you can, but sometimes you do need somebody to talk to. At that time, it's ironical that we probably had it easier to talk to people, to feel closer to people, even though we had less means of communication.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense. So communicating with people was actually more to the point and more down to earth, because you didn't have, well, not more down to earth, but mostly more to the point. You didn't have an immediate means of communication unless you were person to person, face to face. So when you had something to say, you had to be pretty succinct about it, and that made it easier to communicate your feelings if you had them. But I've always been really lucky in that sense. I've always been lucky in that I've always had somebody close to be able to externalize my feelings. So when my reflection wasn't really quite working, I could always turn to Fred and say, "Listen, man, I'm feeling like this." And he would tell me something that would make me feel better somehow, right? It's always been like that. Or my sister or Chenda. It's always been lucky. Mm-hmm. That's my second bit of advice to anybody. Try to have somebody close that will understand you, and that will never ever be judgmental. It's really easy to be judgmental when somebody says, "Dude, I'm feeling lonely." It's really easy to say, "What? Lonely? How do you say lonely? You got millions of friends." You can have as many friends as you want and still feel lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going back to your question, the therapy thing. I don't really know.
Not necessarily therapy, but just talking about these things, talking about how your mental state is. But obviously therapy does come into this, Well,
that's exactly it. I suppose what I'm trying to say, what I'm really answering my own question with, is saying that those people around me, those special people around me, were my therapists. Mm-hmm. And I them as well. I've always had very, very deep conversations. I'm not a shallow guy. I don't like shallow conversations. I'm not very good at them. I'm not good at small talk at all. I like deep conversations. And when you have a deep conversation with somebody, you end up talking about your feelings, and you end up talking about the way you feel inside. And ultimately, whoever it is that's doing the talking and feels listened to is always going to feel better for it. Mm-hmm. And I've always been very lucky in that I've had very, very close people that are very, very good listeners.
Yeah.
Now these days, that circle has widened. I still have Chenda, I still have Alfredo, I still have Nikki, I still have Teresa. But I've added to that Lucas, who's an amazing listener and an amazing guy. I've added you to that, and I've added Mummy, of course. Mm-hmm. So I consider myself really lucky.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think that obviously social media and the internet, you kind of responded to this slightly before, but do you think social media and the internet has kind of helped people to stop feeling lonely? Even though maybe it doesn't seem like it, because nowadays it is a more open topic and it is something that people talk about more, so it's kind of like it's more seen and people obviously talk about it more, so it seems like it happens more often. But do you think it's kind of actually reduced or made it easier for people to feel less lonely?
I think it's made it easier for people to feel more lonely. And I've been reading, just before this podcast, I've been reading some statistics, and surprisingly, it is like that. Especially younger generations, your generations, as opposed to mine, you Gen Zs, as opposed to Gen Xs, are feeling more lonely because of social media. And the reason for that is because it's shallower. There is no deep conversation going on. So you've made good friends online, and those friends are actually pretty good. They're really good. And I hope you'll answer my questions later about that. But most people don't. Most people have very, very shallow relationships when it comes to social media, when it comes to online gaming, and they don't use social media to interact in a deep way. So that actually, for a start, that enhances any kind of feeling of loneliness you might have, because you don't have anybody to share your thoughts with. That's first of all. Second of all, social media, when it comes to doom scrolling, and when I speak about social media, I have to be really careful here, because I'm pro social media. What I am against totally is the doom scrolling era, where you just follow influencers and you're just flicking the switch and flicking the thumb constantly, and you're being bombarded with this amount of visuals that don't really have, that you don't have time to process. That's what I'm against. And the reason I'm against it is, part of it is because you're seeing the reality that people want you to see.
Yeah.
And very often that reality is much better than yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always going to make you feel lonely, because
Yeah.
it's an unattainable reality where you see these gorgeous, beautiful people leading beautiful lives, driving beautiful cars, and going to beautiful places every single day. Most of the people that see that are going to think like, man, I could never do that. I could never be like that.
Mm-hmm.
My life sucks. And that's just not good. There's nothing healthy about that. And there's nothing positive about that. So I think that's the reason why younger generations especially are suffering that syndrome. And I think that's why therapy is becoming, as you say, popular. Maybe it's not popular. I think it's becoming necessary, because those people increasingly have nobody to turn to, because everybody around them is shallow and doesn't really care about your life. They don't want to see your life. They don't want to see your dingy little bedroom in your dorm in the university. They want to see you with a huge beat behind you and a beautiful tan and beautiful muscles, saying, dude, I got the life, right?
Yeah.
So it's a bit sad.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. But I feel like that's more like I said, the bad part of comparison, like the what they say, comparison is a thief of joy. And obviously when you are using social media and a lot and seeing, like you said, these beautiful people on these beautiful beaches having these beautiful lives, it's very hard not to compare yourself, because at the end of the day, that's what you're seeing every day, for depending on how often you use social media, of course, but for a few hours. So, for example, for me, it would be very easy to be like, oh, I'm living in a dingy, like you said, a dingy dorm room in a dingy apartment and a cloudy country, Yeah,
where... and yet it's really, in that situation, it's really easy for you to forget how lucky you are.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You're a middle class young man who is lucky enough to go abroad to university, who is lucky enough to be able to be living in a dingy little bedroom.
Exactly. And is lucky enough to go to university, to study the subject or the course that I want to study, not the subject that my parents want me to study or whatever, So, I agree with you, but at the same time, I feel like if used right, social media and the internet can definitely kind of help you, drag you out of the loneliness hole. But, like I said, it has to be used right, and it has to be done properly. But yeah, I kind of guess you already talked about this before, but nowadays, what do you think the best thing or the first step to getting out of that lonely feeling is? Do you think even nowadays it is still finding that person that you can talk to, that will listen to you without judgments?
Totally. I think there's those two little things I said. I'm not really sure which one's most important, but I think probably being self-reflective is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
Because before you even speak to anybody that will understand you, you need to know what you have to say.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to look into yourself, find out what you're feeling, what you're feeling, especially why you're feeling it. And normally the answers are also within you.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to blame external factors for our loneliness or for our feelings of depression, but very often they're caused simply by us.
Yeah.
Right. And once you get past that hurdle, which is already on its own quite hard, then you have to be able to voice them out to somebody. It's really important that you do.
Yeah.
So those two little things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Do you have any questions for me? Because I know you do, but
I have a couple of questions. Mostly, I was very happy when we came up with this topic. Mm-hmm. Because I'm your father, and as your father, I know that we get along very, very well. We have a great relationship. But as your father, me and mom worry about you. Mm-hmm. because you fall into that category. You're a young 20-year-old adult. You make extensive use of social media, but most importantly, you're in Ireland on your own.
Yeah.
Right. And we speak to you very often, and you look all right. But I've always wondered, do you feel lonely? And now that we're on the subject, and we have a good relationship, and we're talking about introspection and having somebody to talk to you, lay it all out, my son. Are you lonely, or have you felt lonely? Should I worry?
Currently, right now, I do not feel lonely at all. But I have felt lonely here, definitely. We I think we talked about this briefly on the the moving out the podcast about moving out.
Yeah.
And that was especially at the beginning of this year. And that was kind of the culmination of multiple factors, you know. Like I said, last year, my first year, I had basically all my friends were French Erasmus students. So obviously that year ended. So this year they're not here anymore. And the two roommates that I had, they were both French Erasmus students as well, and I got along very well with them. So when I was at home, I would talk to them a lot and I'd hang out with them a lot. Whereas this year, the vibe in our houses or in our apartment is very different. We're all much more, we all keep to ourselves a lot more, and we're not as close as last year. So that's the first thing, is I didn't even have that many people to talk to when after classes and after everything. When I got home, I was kind of just like, well, I'm here. And the other thing that coincided was my two best friends, Raul and Krish, who are in Spain. Krish was still studying in London at the time, and he obviously had his own stuff and he had his own friends, so he was very busy in London and we didn't really talk as much. And Raul, I'm pretty sure, was in the middle of an exam period at the time, so I couldn't really talk to him that much. So I found that when I got home and after classes and everything like that, I kind of didn't really have much to do, and I was A, bored, and B, didn't have anyone to talk to, you know. So I did kind of feel a bit lonely. And when this happened, I did let you guys know. I told you guys that this was when I went back, I think it must have been mid-October, around there, for midterm. I went back for a week. I think it was a week or two, or a week and a half, back to Spain to see you guys and to see all my friends and stuff like that. And that was very good, because, you know, I kind of got to socialize a bit, and I saw you guys and I missed you guys loads as well. Yeah, that was very beneficial for me. And then when I got back, just before I came back to Spain for the midterm, I was getting closer to Adrian and to another guy. He's called Temidayo, who they're both my friends, like my closest friends here. Then when I got back, our friendship flourished even more and we got closer. So that definitely helped a lot and kind of made it a lot easier, because I hang out with them and every once in a while we watch football when the three of us can and stuff like that. So it's a lot better now. And like I said, both Krish and Raul right now aren't as busy anymore, and they weren't as busy then. Right. So yeah. Well, currently right now I'm the busy one because I'm in the middle of my exams, so I'm studying. So they're probably a bit like, dude, this guy doesn't talk to us at all. But yeah, I think that's that I can think of the only time that I've really felt alone, or lonely, I should say.
And were you close to any kind of feeling of desperation, of feeling like, you know, I really don't want to be here, I want to get the hell out, or?
No. I mean, the feeling was more of I wanted to go home to see you guys. I knew that would help me a lot. So there was never a feeling of like, I want to leave here for good, you know? It was more of I want to go back to see everyone, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but because ultimately I knew that this was going to be a temporary thing. I knew, I didn't think this feeling was going to stay forever. And I knew that, you know, it basically was all going to go away sooner rather than later, you know. And
the going away soon was because you were going to visit us here in Spain. Is that?
Yeah, and also like I said before that, I was becoming friends with Adrian, and you know, I could see that I really liked him as a friend, and I had the feeling that he did as well. So I could see the friendship moving on, and progressing, you know. So I feel like that was definitely a lot easier, to be honest.
Okay. And has any of the two things that I've said, have they made any sense to you? Definitely. Did you feel any kind of self-reflection? Did you stop and think how you felt and why and how you could get out of it? Or did you try to avoid it and say, I don't want to think about that. All I want to do is go to Spain so I don't have to think about my loneliness?
No, not at all. I mean, that was definitely... Like the first thing that I did was I thought about myself, and I could feel that I myself wasn't feeling as good as usual, you know, just in my spirits and in my mood. So I kind of thought to myself, like, why do I feel this way? What do I, what do I think is the reason, you know? And I eventually got to the conclusion that I felt kind of alone, you know? And I don't want to say isolated, but yeah, low-key kind of isolated, you know? And then I mentioned it to you guys, and I asked if it would be okay if I could go back home for a bit, just to see you guys and to be with everyone. And you guys said, yeah, of course, we would love to have you. And yeah, definitely. I feel like also the trip back home kind of was very good to also have a bit of a mental reset, you know? Because when I was here, and seeing as I was so lonely, I was playing a bit of video games and I was watching series and stuff like that, but my life was basically just university, you know? So even though it wasn't particularly a very stressful time in terms of me having lots and lots of work or having a really high workload, but, you know, that was essentially the only thing that I was really thinking about and the only thing that I was really doing, you know? Yeah. And that's very mentally taxing, I feel like, you know? Yeah. So it was a very, very good thing to, like I said, just have a mental reset to go back to Spain.
Fair enough. And one thing I've always noticed, and I think this might not just be your generation or you or whatever, I think it's something that I've always seen a very marked difference between me, my friends, and you, right? Mm-hmm. But as I say, I don't think it's just you. I think the weird one here is me. Is the fact that I've always seen you around your friends. I've heard you when you talk to them, when you're playing online, when you talk to them on the phone, and I've never seen you had really, really deep conversations with any of them. You know, I remember back in the day, and even to this day, my conversations with Alfredo and Nikki are anything but, I mean, we do talk about what we did that day, but we always end up invariably talking about life or feelings or some sort of philosophical subject about whatever it is, relationships. And my life has always been like that because that's the way I think. So I'm also very surprised that people don't find any solace in that. They just like talking about football and who their favorite players are. And I've always kind of envied the fact that seems to be enough for them to get rid of any kind of bad feeling. Mm-hmm. Whereas for me, that's just superficial talk, which is not bad. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to have. But for me to feel better, I need to have some sort of deep conversation. Yeah. Right. If I'm like this morning, if I'm with mommy watching the sunrise in the biggest dune in Europe here in Bologna, you know, there's something there that's much more than a sunrise. It's much more, the feelings are much deeper than that. And I have to voice them out. I can't just feel them. I have to look at mom and say, man, there's just something special about this, right? And that's the way I always feel about everything. My conversations at work are always a little bit awkward with people because I tend to make them a little bit next level. And then they tend to look at me thinking like, what is this guy talking about? Right. So, but that's always made it really, really easy for me not to feel lonely because of those conversations. So I've always worried about you. And this is something that I think mommy has in common with me. I worry that you don't have anybody that wants to listen to those deep conversations or that even you don't want to have them. Mm. If you see what I mean. I don't know if I'm making any sense or I'm just...
no, I see what you mean, but, you know, me and Raul and Krish are my best friends, and even with Adrian as well, we definitely do have deep conversations, but I feel like for us, there's a time and a place, you know? I feel like, obviously, when we're in the middle of a video game or in the middle of a Valorant game, you know, with Raul and Krish, we're not going to be talking about how our mental state is, you know? Because...
Well, why not?
That's because we're focused on winning the game, you know. Yeah. So you know, in the moments, the conversation that we're having is really basically focused on Valorant, you know. It's so
you just shot a man. Tell me about it. How do you feel?
Yeah, exactly. You know, right. But me, like definitely, and also over the phone as well. Like most of the time, especially when I'm in Spain, if I'm talking to one of them over the phone, it's because we're probably planning on when we're going to see each other in person next, you know. Yeah. And if we're not playing anything, or we're not, you know, just I kind of guess if we're not like watching football by ourselves or something, you know, I feel like the conversations do tend to get a bit more deep. Like I said, it just depends on the time and the place, you know. And if, fair enough, for example, with Adrian or with Raul or Krish or with Thomas, if we needed to talk about something, you know, then we would just bring it up and we would talk about it, you know. It's not, you know, if that conversation does arises, then we'll have the conversation, you know, but it doesn't always arise. And
Fair enough.
And yeah.
So I've given you my two little tricks to get over any kind of feeling of loneliness. What are yours?
I'm going to say exactly the same as you, to be honest. I think you really did hit the nail on the head. I think the first thing to kind of with anything, if you're trying to fix something, is to probably find out what the problem is, you know? And that applies to literally everything and every single problem in the world. If you want to fix it, you have to find out what's actually going wrong.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, basically the first thing you have to do. Think to yourself, kind of sit down with yourself, with your own head, and just try to understand why you're feeling this way, what you're feeling. Then from there on, try to go to someone who will listen to you, whether that's your best friend, your parents, a therapist, whoever. Just try to talk to them, and maybe sometimes even just expressing what you're feeling, sometimes that helps more than enough.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think
I agree.
Definitely. And then obviously if you do need some feedback and you do need some advice, and for you to analyze the advice and kind of think to yourself if you think the advice is good or not. Because obviously if they give you terrible advice, then maybe don't follow through with it. But
you know what? That's a really good point. The fact is that I didn't touch on that side of things because when you're depressed and you're lonely, normally the last thing they could give you is advice.
Yeah.
Right. That once you start getting over that and you're speaking to somebody, starts helping, then yes, maybe there's a time for that person to give you a little bit of advice and to say, well, listen, try this or try that, or maybe you're doing this wrong, or change your diet or do more exercise, whatever. But to be honest, when you are feeling depressed, when you are feeling lonely, when you do really need somebody to talk to, at that point, what you really need is somebody to listen rather than somebody to talk back at you.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't mention it before. But you're right. It's a good thing. Once you do get past that first hurdle and you start feeling better, and that person that's listened has listened, and that function has served its purpose, then it is time to sit back and listen to what they have to say. Because if they've been able to listen properly, chances are that if they give you advice, it's always going to be good. Normally people like that don't really want to give you advice that's going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or that's going to be bad advice. It might hurt you. Sometimes the truth hurts, and you have to be prepared for that. But that's
I was going to say that.
It's good you say it, because it's hard. Part of this self-reflection comes with being able to listen to people that have to give you advice, and sometimes they have to give you a truth that you don't want to listen to. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do as well. But if they have you and your well-being in their interest, then you're better off listening to them and not dismissing what they're saying as bad advice. And also I like to think that having parents that also want to listen to you when you're a child helps, because I think that's one of the things that I think that we have a good relationship, and I hope I hope you think so too.
I do too. Definitely. Yeah, I completely agree. I think, like I said, or well, like you said, that the truth hurts, and sometimes hearing that advice, once it does arrive, is hard to do, and it's hard to kind of actually go through with what they tell you, because sometimes the advice, whether it's right or wrong, is the last thing that you want to do. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I think this is a good place to leave it off. I think we'll probably end up going in circles like we usually do if we continue. So kind of just to wrap things up and to summarize this episode, I think the best way to say it is, the first thing to do is self-reflect, find out what's wrong with you, and then talk to someone that will listen and is willing to listen, to then kind of slowly but surely weasel your way out of the situation, Yeah,
exactly. Easier said than done. We realize that, but it is the way to go. Talk to somebody and listen to yourself.
Exactly. So is there anything you want to say before I sign off, my dude?
Nothing else, man. I'm sorry that you're not here with us. I really do wish you were here celebrating Mom's birthday.
Me too.
And we'll send you photos of the beautiful Atlantic Ocean.
Thank you, my dude. Thank you.
And the tip of Africa.
But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, this very deep and introspective episode. I have to say I definitely did. I really did enjoy it, to kind of just talk about this. I feel like it's a very important topic, and something that doesn't really get talked about as much as it should.
True.
We hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have anything to say, let us know down in the comments. If you like this episode, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. We release an episode every week and every Monday or Tuesday, depending. So thank you guys very much for watching and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.